Chapter 3. The Malfairy. From somewhere below the clouds began a loud tolling, distracting Claudette's reverie. The sound was like church bells, only discordant, as though the bells had been damaged. So there was more to this place than clouds and ghostly stars. She drifted closer to the spot where the distant tolling was loudest, and paused as the final bell rang out. There, she spun slowly in space, while gazing at the eerily beautiful vaporous clouds and considering her options. She felt safe above the clouds, but couldn't very well stay here forever. If there were a reason for her coming to this place, then she would find it somewhere below, on the other side of the clouds. Claudette took a deep breath before diving headfirst into the vapors. It was like jumping into a murky lake. All she could see were the ghostly impressions of her hands thrust out in front of her. Without a horizon to orient herself, she had no idea if she were holding true to her course. For all she knew, she might be drifting left or right, or climbing back upwards again. Just as Claudette began to regret her decision, a huge section of the mist darkened. At first she thought it was just a denser part of the clouds. It seemed too big to be anything else, until it darkened further and began to take shape. She slowed her descent, readying herself for the next wonder in this night of wonders. She was not disappointed, as she watched the crown of a tower rise out of the mist. Thinking of it as a mere tower seemed to belie its immense scale. This was the tower to rule all other towers, a Tower of Babel. As Claudette drifted past it in awe, she noted the curious architectural details, some familiar, some disturbingly other. The windows were tall and arched with crimson glass. The walls were not made of brick, but some kind of glossy black stone that reflected like glass, and perched on the sides were gargoyle-like creatures, though the awful tentacular spidery things did not quite resemble the stone creatures from her world. These sculptures were not merely ugly, they were horrific. The mist thinned further, and Claudette saw that the tower was one of many. She hung suspended over an enormous city full of such structures. While no two were exactly alike, differing in girth, height, and even slant in some cases, the same Gothic flair consistently appeared. It was as though an obsessive artist had been given free rein to conjure up the city from his darkest dreams, attending to every detail with demented enthusiasm. And yet the city might well have been empty of all life. No faces peered out at her from the windows. No figures came to the balconies to stare at the girl floating in the sky. Among the towers, a heavy silence held sway, a silence rendered all the more profound when it was again broken by the tolling of bells. This time Claudette was able to discern the origin of the bells. Below her, partially obscured by rolling greenish fog, was a domed building that resembled the mosques she'd seen years ago while passing through Constantinople. In the courtyard of the mosque was a wide black circle, some sort of hole or well. This was where the ringing of the bells seemed to be coming from. It was all slightly unsettling, but Claudette brushed aside her wariness and directed herself downwards again. She had come this far without harm. There was no reason to think that any would befall her down on the streets. Besides, should she encounter danger, she could always fly away. Nevertheless, gliding down through the shadows of the city, Claudette felt tiny, insignificant, vulnerable, a leaf spiraling through a vast and unknowable forest. The fog rippled away from her as she landed on smooth black stones that were icy cold beneath her feet. She had instinctively kept a distance from the mosque and landed some 100 feet away from it. Now, as she squinted through the fog, she understood why. Circling the well were 7 figures, all standing completely motionless. Claudette trod slowly towards them, her wariness growing. Taller than men, the spindly beings were wrapped in leathery, priest-like cassocks. A faint, smoky luminescence seemed to cling to them as if they were more wraith than flesh. Their heads were oddly shaped, elongated, bone-white, and completely hairless. Black, shiny eyes gleamed from eye sockets that were shadowed and deep. The most disturbing feature of these beings, these well-gazers, were their mouths. They were inhumanly wide and stretched back into frozen rictus grins, revealing twin rows of formidable teeth. She'd made a mistake. Discovering whatever wondrous secrets dwelt at the bottom of the well was not worth drawing the attention of these grinning creatures. Luckily, it seemed they hadn't yet noticed her. They continued to remain inhumanly still, their terrible black gazes focused down towards the hole, waiting, waiting. Demori! Startled by the voice in her head, Claudette whirled around to see that the city had not yet finished revealing its mysteries to her. Standing in the street behind her were three beings. As stunningly beautiful as the grinning monsters were horrible, they were nevertheless far from human. Dressed in dark robes embroidered with swirling silver designs, these three figures, two males and one woman, all shared the same pale blue complexion, jet black lips and luminescent emerald eyes. It was this feature that gave rise to Claudette's astonishment. The emerald colour was so much like her father's eyes, so much like her own. The male creature closest to her was holding a staff topped with a crescent moon. He took a step closer, the staff sending up sparks where it struck the ground. "What is the meaning of this trespass? Are you thief or whore?" Claudette heard the words reverberate through her head, yet the creature's mouth didn't move. Somehow he was communicating through thought alone. "Come to trade or come to steal," he continued impatiently. "Well, can you not speak?" Claudette swallowed dryly before answering. I don't... Neither. Where is this place? Where am I?" Her words were barely a whisper. It was harder to speak here than it was in her world. Something in the air stole the strength from her words before they could leave her mouth. "Little one does not know where she is, Selnai," stated the woman with a cruel smile. The other male, Selnai, Claudette guessed, laughed mirthlessly and licked his lips. "So much fear, so much rage, it dances within her. Can you see it, Veruthan?" "I can, and I want it," the female Veruthan responded. Selnai's eyes widened dangerously. "As do I." "Enough!" The one with the staff struck the ground once more, silencing the others. Clearly he was their leader. Tilting his head to one side, he studied Claudette with evident curiosity. "You do not know this place?" She shook her head slowly, her wary gaze jumping from one coldly beautiful face to the other. "No, I do not." "You are in Crypthea, heart of the Deadlands. I am Jeruthra, Lane of the House Lane. My companions are Veruthan and Selnai of the House Taxos. We are the Malferi, lords of the city, and we are your masters, little Demori." Such strange words, Crypthea, Malferi, Deadlands, and what was that he called it? Demori. Though she'd never heard it before, the word resonated with mysterious power. Still, this was not the phrase that troubled Claudette the most. It was the last thing this Jeruthra Lane had said, for no one was her master. "Now you must answer one of my questions," Jeruthra Lane's glittering eyes narrowed. "Whose side, you child?" She frowned at the unexpected question. What could these dreadful beings possibly want with her father? "Do not trifle with us, speak!" Veruthan's commanding manner jolted the answer out of her. "Ahriman. My father's name is Ahriman." At this, Selnai and Veruthan shared a sideways glance. Even Jeruthra Lane seemed taken back. Staring at Claudette a moment longer, he slowly turned and began conferring with the others. Claudette's thoughts were thrown into disarray by the ensuing conversation. A jumble of disconnected phrases and words rose above the chaos. "Daughter of the First, be rid of them. Skyvers, he will come for her. Ahriman, the key, he could deliver us the key. Filthy half-breed, we will keep her here. Yes, yes, forever if need be." While these fragments made little sense taken on their own, she gleaned enough to recognize the danger. She had to leave this place now, or risk being captured. The trio had fallen silent and were staring at her with new intent. "We have reached a decision, Claudette, daughter of the First," the leader began. "You are to stay with us here in Crypthea until Ahriman returns. There is much we have to discuss with him." Claudette swallowed nervously and attempted to hold the creature's stare. "And if I refuse?" The leader's black lips twitched into a smirk. "You speak as though you have a choice." He looked past Claudette. "Bring her to us, quickly now!" An awful chattering filled the air. Shooting a frightened glance backwards, Claudette saw the circle of well-gazers, skivers, break apart. The chattering sound came from their teeth clicking together, growing louder as they began to glide weightlessly towards her. Paralyzing fear rooted Claudette to the spot. She was trapped. Behind her were the approaching Malferi, and ahead of her the looming, swarming, black-eyed skivers and their awful grins. Within seconds she would be theirs. From deep within her came the old fire roaring up in defiance. No, she would not let them touch her. Claudette tore her gaze away from the skivers, to the towers, to the clouds above. Just as icy fingertips brushed the nape of her neck, her feet left the ground and she was free, soaring away from her would-be captors. Once she had reached the tallest tower's peak, she chanced to look behind her and saw a terrifying sight. The skivers were pursuing her through the air, their black cassocks fluttering about them like the wings of great birds. Claudette willed herself upwards with greater urgency, penetrating the cloud cover and losing herself in the swirling mists. She kept to no fixed path, instead turning and twisting erratically in a desperate attempt to confuse her pursuers. If she was blind up here, then perhaps the skivers were as well. Above her, Claudette could see ghostly green stars shining on the other side of the cloudy haze. That vast empty space which she'd first fallen through was only a few yards away. However, if she were to leave the cloud cover, then she would be easily spotted by the grinning monsters. And even if she did manage to evade them, where would she go? This world was a mystery to her. Desperately trying to decide on a course of action, Claudette didn't see the shadow thickening in the grey murk, or the pale hand stretching towards her with its horrid grasping fingers. Only at the last second did some tingling intuition cause her to turn and see the skiver floating out of the mist with its mouth gaping. With a strangled cry, Claudette shot away from the creature. She spiraled upwards once more, steering through the clouds and into the open sky. The creatures were not far behind. Fighting waves of debilitating panic, Claudette replayed the events that led her to this dark world. There had to be a key to her appearance here. First had come the dream with the wolves, then the strange restlessness that had prompted her to leave her bed. She had ventured to the balcony and stood with her eyes closed, soaking in the night sounds. A carriage had rattled past on the streets below. She had been thinking of the dance halls, and then something flashed in the corner of her vision. Standing out in contrast to the emerald stars was a luminescent rectangle of smoky grey light. Claudette didn't know what it was or what had conjured it, but she aimed herself towards this hazy light. If nothing else, it was a beacon in the darkness. The closer she drew, the more she saw through its shifting grey veil. A bricked wall, crates and piles of refuse, dirty snow. Her heart swelled with hope. She was looking upon a back street alley from her world. The rectangle of light was a doorway, an exit. Hope you enjoyed that little sample of Claudette in the Shadows. Look for it soon on Amazon Kindle Connect or your iTunes store. Thanks.